Welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus teaches a very simple story with a very deep meaning that pertains to my life and to your life. He talks about the parable of the sower. Now, this parable is very unique because it is one of the only parables in the entire New Testament that Jesus takes the time to give us an explicit meaning. In the beginning of Matthew 13, in verses 1 to 9, we have the parable. And then as we skip down several verses, he talks about the meaning of parables, why he talks in parables, and then he gives an explicit definition of what this parable is about to his disciples. It's very different because normally parables, we don't get an explanation. Jesus tells a story and he allows us as the listeners, as the hearers, for us as readers, to figure out, what does this mean? Why is he telling this story? What are we supposed to learn from it? And that's why if you go back a couple lessons, if this is the first one you're watching, we talk about the parables and what they mean and how to get the most out of them. Parables generally have a singular meaning. There is one thing that Jesus says, this is why I'm telling this. Now, this is a little different because here he's going to talk about 4 different types of soil. And so this has some wider implications for all of those who hear the message. We're all going to fall into one of these 4 categories. But as we think about this parable, there are a couple things that we ought to mention on the front end. The first is that the way the sower is going to sow in this parable is very different than the way farmers are going to be planting seeds in the 21st century. Even for you at home, if you have a garden, you probably till up your ground and place your seeds very strategically. Well, in the first century, they basically took handfuls of seed and threw them out and let them fall where they would and grow where they would. And so we need to know that, but also, as Jesus tells this story, remember that the focus of this is not so much on the sower. Even when Jesus gives us the definition and the meaning of this parable, he's not going to tell us who the sower is. We can think about this in a couple different ways that are true to the meaning that Jesus means. Maybe we think about this in the way that each and every one of us are introduced to the gospel. And who teaches us doesn't necessarily matter. The fact is there is a sower. There is someone putting out seeds. Maybe we think about this evangelistically and we think about ourselves as the sower. And for all of those people that we introduce the word or the gospel, the seed to, it's going to fall into different types of grounds and hearts. But one thing we need to focus on is the idea that the seed is not flawed. The same seed is sown to all 4 types in this parable. It's not that in some cases the seed doesn't perform its job. If you think about Isaiah 55 verse 11, God says that his word never returns empty, but it always serves its purpose. If we are being true to the gospel story, the word is not flawed. The word does not fail, but rather it's the types of places that it is sown into that sometimes have issue and problem. Let's dive right in and let's read this parable together. Matthew chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him so that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. In order for us to be faithful to the parable that Jesus tells, you and I need to look at this best individually. And we ask ourselves the question, what type of soil am I? One of the things that we emphasized earlier when we talked about what parables are and the purpose that they served is that you can often find why Jesus is telling this story based on what events or things happen around it in its context. Well, I want you to maybe pause right here and go back and read Matthew 12 and read all of chapter 13, because around these two chapters, there are lots of people who get to make a decision about how they feel about Jesus. There are people who are introduced to Jesus, who have interactions with him, and they are going to have to make a decision as to who they see Jesus as. I think Jesus partly tells this because of that decision people must make. And so he wants to tell a parable emphasizing the different hearts that are going to interact with this question, who is Jesus? But now as we dive deeper into this, I want us to think first about this first type of soil. He says it's the one that is along the path. The problem here in verse 4, he says, as he sowed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. The problem with the path is that it is so hard packed that the seed does not immediately penetrate, and then the birds come, they eat the seed. As Jesus explains what this means over in chapter 13 and verse 18 and 19, it says, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path." How important is it when we hear the gospel to be able to grasp and understand it? Well, there are so many people who maybe hear the gospel for the first time. Maybe it piques an interest, but their heart is not ready for it. They are not looking for the gospel. They're not looking for a relationship with the Lord or with the Savior, and thus they do nothing with it. And quickly the devil comes and he snatches that seed before it has time to penetrate into the soil. This seems to be exactly what Jesus is talking about. We think about this in terms of what happens in Acts chapter 9. Philip is on the road and he finds this man in a chariot who is studying the Old Testament scriptures. The first question that he asks this eunuch is, do you understand what you read? How important is it for us to make sure as we sow seeds that people understand it? Because without understanding these words, this seed has no value. It's not brought into our hearts. It doesn't affect our souls. It does no good for us because it just stays on the surface. Maybe it's something that we tinker with, but it's never really something that we soak up. On the other hand, you have this mentality that this parable is about me and it's about you. And maybe we ought to ask the question, have we walled off the seed that is planted into our lives? Now, you may at this point say, hold on, I'm a Christian. I'm baptized. I'm saved. I am living for God. But I think that this soil type can still be seen within those who call themselves Christians. And I hope we're not so quick to judge that we don't give thought to these soil types that are not so good. I think that it is totally possible for Christian people to have a moment in their life where they turn off their receptiveness to the gospel. They are no longer renewed after the likeness of the Savior. They stop looking to be eager to grow. And so for a while, they become stagnant in their faith. During this time, absolutely, if the word is not penetrating into our hearts and our souls, yes, the devil does come and he tries to snatch that word away from us so that it yields nothing in our lives. But second, Jesus talks about that which is sown among the thorns. Let's look at verse 5 and 6. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil, but when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. As we think about this type, Jesus explains it to us in verse 20 and 21. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. But when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. This is the troublesome part about the rocky soil. The word is received gladly and with joy, and it even makes a produce. The problem is that the depth of the soil here is so shallow that this new crop is not able to take root in the ground. it is not able to grow. It is thus not able to sustain itself. And whenever things happen to this crop, it quickly withers and it dies. Here Jesus says that it's because of two things. It's because of tribulation and persecution that this newfound crop of the gospel dies. Tribulation is the idea of its suffering, its problems, its hardship. And if you've not experienced those things in your life, for one, you're very blessed, but two, know that those things are going to come. Unfortunately, hardship and problem is just something that we have to deal with in our life and in our world. But then the other part that takes a bad turn for this newfound crop is persecution. And unfortunately, in our fallen world, sometimes there's hardship simply because we want to follow Christ. Now, in different parts of the world and at different times in history, this persecution has looked differently. And depending on where you're sitting watching this video today, the persecution you've experienced may be vastly different than someone else who is watching. Your experiences with persecution may be totally different than others, but in some way or another, it is totally countercultural for us to live with Jesus. The world that we live in does not want us to live for the Lord. Rather, it wants us to fit in with all the other people, to live like the world, to live with the desires of the world. And thus, it causes problems when we choose to abandon that lifestyle and then live for Jesus. Earlier in chapter 7 in Matthew, when Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount, at the end he talks about the importance of a foundation being grown in all of our lives. And again, he tells a parable that is probably very familiar to us. He talks about a wise man and a foolish man. They both build houses, and then life happens to both of them. Rain comes, storms come, winds blow and beat against both of these houses, but one of them is able to survive. It is the one with a foundation built on the rock rather than one built on the sand. When our foundation shifts and when a foundation can't be built in a solid way, it gives problems for every house. If you've ever seen a building of any sort with foundation problems, you understand just how much damage can be built if a house or a building is not built on a proper foundation. The same thing is true with our lives, and Jesus says that if we give no thought to how we are building our lives and what we are building it on, if we don't build our house on the truth of God's word, if we don't build our house on the living way that Jesus would have us to be, then we're going to encounter foundation problems. And that's what happens, unfortunately, with that in the rocky soil. Additionally, in Colossians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul is going to talk about the importance of being rooted and grounded in the right things. Listen to what he's going to write to the infant church at Colossae. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. But he goes on to verse 8, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. Here Paul makes it very clear that what we are rooted in is going to make a huge difference in the way that we're able to follow Christ. If we are rooted and built in Christ, if we are established in the faith, we're going to be able to walk in Christ very easily. But he gives a warning. Don't be led astray and don't build your life on a foundation that can't withhold when hard times come. Don't invest in things that are deceitful or empty, but rather be built according to Christ. Going back to Matthew 13, we see the third type that Jesus talks about, and it is the seed that is sown in the thorny ground. We find this in verse 7. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And then Jesus gives us the meaning of this in verse 22. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. Think about how this works in our day and time. The seed is sown, and just as it penetrates and it begins to grow, all of these things around it choke it out. It's these voices that say, if you live for Christ, you won't live well in this world. If you live for Christ, this is going to happen to you, and it's going to put you at odds with your family and your friends, and you won't be popular anymore. If you do this, then maybe your career won't pan out the way that you think it will. The deceitfulness of things in this world and of riches take over, and they choke out the good that could happen in that life. Listen to the words of Psalm 52 as it talks about a similar struggle. Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all the day. Your tongue plots destruction. Like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit. You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue, but God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous shall see and fear and laugh at him, saying, see the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. I will thank you forever because you have done it. I will wait for your name, for it is good in the presence of the godly. Similarly, the wise man in Proverbs 11 verse 28 says, whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf. There are things in this life that will try to take precedence over a relationship with God. But please don't fall for that trick. Don't allow the thorns that may be in your life to detract you from living a life that honors the gospel call. Don't allow the deceitfulness that is a false narrative to come into your life to choke out what God is able to do and to sell you short of the amazing and great life that we can all attain within God when we name him our Savior and we follow him. The problem with the thorny ground is not so much the ground, but it's the fact that it has cohabitated for so long with things that are going to choke out anything good that can come. And then very last, we come to the good ground, the ground that Christ praises because it is able to grow a substantial crop and it puts forth what it ought. Listen to this from verse 8. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. As for verse 23, as Jesus talks about what this means, he says, as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. As for you and me, while this is what we strive for, I want you to realize that this ground must be maintained. And if you have ground like this in your garden or in your fields, if you're a farmer, it doesn't happen by chance. It's because these grounds have been cultivated. They have been made to be this way. You've picked out all of the rocks. You have found a place that can grow a crop. You have weeded out everything that is going to choke out a good harvest. And while this is the type that Christ says is good, please know that if you are at once good ground, you can become bad soil. But also there's hope, because all of the other types of ground that he talks about here can have the potential to be good soil that is going to create a crop that is sustaining. Notice these two passages with me. The first is from Psalm chapter 1. Begin in verse 1, it says, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. Also think about Luke chapter 6. Jesus says, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, for each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. Having talked about these four types, the question that you and I must ask ourselves is, who do we identify with? Or rather, what do we identify with here? Are we that is sown along the path? When the Word of God has come to us, we are maybe intrigued by it, but we never do anything with it. And before our hearts can soak it up, the evil one comes, the birds come, and they eat up, they devour the seed, and thus it proves unuseful for us. Maybe you find yourself in a rocky place. The problem is that while you want the gospel in your life, it has no depth. It doesn't have time to grow. And eventually, because it is such a shallow thing in your life, it doesn't prove useful. Maybe because of who you're surrounded with, the atmosphere that you're trying to grow the gospel in your life, it won't work because there are things that constantly choke it out. Are there things in your life that you need to get rid of in order for the gospel to have its full effect and power in your life? The gospel doesn't grow when the soil types will not let it. Remember what we said in the beginning. The seed is never the problem. It is never that God has done something wrong. It's not that Scripture has done something wrong. It always comes back to those of us who are hearing it. And if our hearts aren't right, if we've not been prepared to take the gospel in our own hearts, then it will prove unuseful to us. Not that the seed is wrong, but it's that the ground is not yet ready. And then we come to this fourth type. It's the good soil. It's the type that I hope desperately that you and I are in our lives. I hope that we have cultivated ourselves. We've gotten rid of every obstacle so that the gospel works in our lives, so that it proves useful, and so that we are a crop before the Lord, yielding a great yield for Him and His glory. Please remember, though, as we think about our own lives, if we are not the soil type that we want to be, there is hope for change. If you know soils, you know that all of them can be cultivated, and they can always be changed when effort is put into changing the soil. If there are things that need to happen in your life so that the gospel can take effect, so that the beauty of living for Christ can be a reality in your life, know that that can happen. If there's anything that we can do as a church to assist you, please reach out to us by our website, www.walterhillchurch.com. You can also find us on Facebook. Send us a private message there. If there is a way that we can help you, we would love to help you as you seek to have the gospel grow and yield in your life. Again, thank you so much for watching this. I hope that God blesses you in the days to come.